like if we look at nonprofit, we assume nonprofits to be in that higher ethical range. But then you look at, certain people who behave in manners that are not consistent with the brand. United Way, for example, had a CEO who diddled children for many years. And now how are you helping kids when you're exploiting them at the same time? Oh, yeah. So, but people still donate to the United Way, even when the CEO was outed and he never got fired. Yeah, he's not there now, so United Way's cleaned up their act. But during the time frame, it was people knew, but they still overlooked that bad behavior because they thought the good behavior overwhelmed it. To me, that's the weird thing, right? It's like when you got something that's super good, it gets overwhelmed by the bad.
Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Karl Pontau. Each week, I'll bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Ken Ziegler. He leverages over 20 years of customer-facing experience to drive his advocacy for ethical AI, blending hands-on insights with knowledge in ethics, AI, psychology, and customer success. Known for his LinkedIn anime-inspired blog, The Not Quite Humanoid Typhoon, Ken addresses the ethical implications of AI, including bias detection, fairness, and transparency, while exploring how technology impacts both businesses and individuals. His goal is to build trust in AI-driven systems by promoting a human-centered, ethical approach that meets real customer needs. Currently pursuing a community manager role within a SaaS environment, Ken aims to continue bridging customer-focused values with AI principles to shape a responsible and accountable future in tech. Congrats on advocating for ethical AI, and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Thanks, Karl.
So I'm really
forgot
excited.
How much of that was a mouthful there.
Yes, a little fumble there, but I made it through. So I'm excited to talk with you about the community manager sort of and ethics with AI that you mentioned in the bio there, because you mentioned something earlier about sandbox ethics and how companies can use that in their PR and in their marketing to really build more of a connection with their customers and keep them around longer than if they're just do their kind of standard marketing that so many companies are defaulting to. So tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, if we look at the original theory of sandbox ethics in like our childhood concept, it is literally the development of your ethical building in a controlled environment. So if we apply that on a corporate level, so you can experiment a bit with your ethics so that you know what's right and what's wrong, because not everyone's always going to agree. But what it comes down to is, can you get the majority of your stakeholders to agree? And that way it increases your profit margins as a result when you have to compare it to the people that are selling the same product, but they're using a different ethical value.
Yeah, I think it's those understanding and even really like knowing those deeper ethics about your company is really important, because when you can communicate that and show with transparency that you're actually living those values and not just using them as lip service, that really helps attract more people to you that are going to want to use your product versus the competitors that might even have a slightly better offer but doesn't operate with the same ethics that you do. And so that having that differentiator on a core level of how people define who they are as a person is really key, because it's not something else that your competitors can easily copy.
Well, because I mean, at that point, you're trying to like compare virtue ethics, and virtue ethics is just the ethics that we all, tried and true. We learned it as we grew. You aren't just born an ethical person. The concept of virtue is that you've developed them over time. I think when it comes to a corporate level, we're looking at more, the name of it just left me, but it's when we start putting like a numerical value on our ethical scales. And so we, like if the end equation ends up in the positive, we consider it an ethical act. And having that kind of a justification to a lot of things, we could see like bad behavior with the good outcome argument. I think on a virtue level, we apply, as long as we're behaving consistently, we can see it as a more ethical person, even when there's a trip up. So it's like, okay, I've made an error, but it's forgivable because consistently, usually it's a good way to go. And so I think as a society, we've kind of been less forgiving as of late. So we almost forgot that virtue. So when we see the trip up, we hammer it to the point that it becomes not just career ending, but industry ending.
Well, I think it's also because, I mean, that I agree that there's been that more of a harsher response to those mistakes, but I think it's also because the companies haven't been doing the virtuous stuff. We kind of don't trust them anyway. So when they do screw up, we're not going to cut them any slack because we don't trust them to begin with. And so it's almost like a vindication to, or like a catharsis to stick it to them when they screw up in a way, because they're obviously not operating with the same ethics that human beings normally do, or most people operate under. And so I think the onus is on companies to lead with having proper ethics, or like a more human-centered ethics, and operate with those. And if they show that consistently with transparency and authenticity, and actually walk the walk, then if they do screw up, then they'll get more leeway and they'll be more likely to forgive them because they've rebuilt that trust. But it's something that's got to be done by the companies first.
Well, agree. Well, I mean, it also comes down. We have like some great examples. Are you familiar with Gravity Payments, for example?
No.
So the CEO, Dan Price, put his foot down. He said, you know what? I'm not going to get paid more than my lowest paid employee. So everyone in the company makes $70,000 a year, including himself.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this guy now. Yeah.
Now, we like the ethical behavior behind the CEO's decision to say everybody should make a living wage. It went to the point where even his own staff were like, well, he deserves a better vehicle to drive around than he can afford. And they collectively bought him one. So like his own employees have decided, the ethical CEO deserves a bit more. Now, obviously there's, people are going to come for you at that point. You notice how when you disrupt the status quo, there becomes controversy. So people start digging into your past because you say, you must be canceled because no one's allowed to be good. So when you start seeing someone who's actually behaving in a manner that breaks status quo, you have to wonder what inspired them to do it. Maybe it may have been something that they did do in the past that kind of sucks. And I find a lot of companies are, of that mindset as well. We made an error and we learned from it. Now, I could point out like Monsanto. They created mustard gas. Yes, absolutely horrific, weapon of war. Does that mean everything they've made since is bad? There is a lot of controversy, the idea that some people think it is, but I would say that not everything they've done is actually a bad thing. They've done some actually really good humanitarian work that gets overlooked because of the narrative that they're awful. When they got bought out and renamed, hopefully the rebranding helps them in the future. But who knows?
I mean, I think a lot of what, at least I didn't even know they were the ones that made mustard gas. Just know they still do a lot of kind of scummy things that aren't great for farmers. Like farmers can't replant their own seeds because they have to keep buying it from Monsanto. So like there's a lot of things they're doing now that isn't great or ethical. So their reputation, I don't think, is completely blackened just from they invented mustard gas all those years ago. I think. Oh, yeah. So but the fact that you mentioned just now that they invented mustard gas, I'm like, oh, that doesn't surprise me at all. Which is just, again, from a PR branding side, I think is like, that's not a great association. They want me, like, for me to just go, that's on brand for them, is a sign of how bad their brand reputation is.
But to their benefit, Karl, they actually have created some life-saving stuff. Golden Rice being a great example of one that they built and have designed, but they're not allowed to properly test because of the protests against them as a brand. So it's like, do we hold that history of their bad behavior against them to prevent any of the good that might come from what they create? Because golden rice, in theory, could help cure blindness in many parts of the world due to vitamin A deficiencies.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be a balance between the two. And I think in general, there's not enough balance in anything these days. People want to go for like either extreme because it just takes less mental effort to swim in the gray area. But the reality of things is that it's almost all gray area at some point. There's never anything that's completely black and white. And so I think that there is a way to balance that brand out, or that brand's allowed to do, but it takes effort and work, and someone like you who helps people with like the community building and the PR side of stuff to help them manage that dialogue. But it's
because we can look at industries as a whole. Like if we look at nonprofit, we assume nonprofits to be in that higher ethical range. But then you look at, certain people who behave in manners that are not consistent with the brand. United Way, for example, had a CEO who diddled children for many years. And now how are you helping kids when you're exploiting them at the same time? Oh, yeah. So, but people still donate to the United Way, even when the CEO was outed and he never got fired. Yeah, he's not there now, so United Way's cleaned up their act. But during the time frame, it was people knew, but they still overlooked that bad behavior because they thought the good behavior overwhelmed it. To me, that's the weird thing, right? It's like when you got something that's super good, it gets overwhelmed by the bad. But when you got something that's super good, we never allow the bad to overwhelm it. So how does it go one way but not the other way?
Yeah, I think I definitely recognize the phenomena you're describing, and I'm happy to admit that I don't know enough about like that as like societal phenomenon to have any sort of answers. But I have at least the first understanding of just how complicated human beings are on the individual level, and when you get a group together, it's orders and orders of magnitude more complicated.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's again, there's
that's the kind of thing that makes me interested in what proposing people do, right? It's using our ethical knowledge as that sales pitch. It's getting people to use their critical thinking, not just their wallet, when it comes to how we affect the system. So it's getting people to stop sitting on the fence and saying, well, I have to be an extremist or only listen to extremes. It's starting to choose the gray water, because not only does it make more sense in the long term, it gives us a healthier brain set and makes us more resistant to the manipulations of markets that are trying to force us in certain directions. And I can give another example, and that would be like the Sydney Sweeney thing that happened over the summer. I would argue the majority of us didn't care. We looked at the marketing and we were just like, oh, okay. But then we got told we had to have an opinion. We got told if you're on this side, you have to think like this. And if you're on that side, you have to think like that. And the narrative got pushed by conservative online media. And they did some research into that, and they found that it took almost 5 days of the conservatives telling us to care before anyone actually gave a damn. The communications about that ad campaign didn't exist until a week after the campaign hit the air.
Yeah, and I think it's what you mentioned earlier about just getting people to think critically again is something that is a muscle that a lot of people have let atrophy, and it's to the detriment of themselves and society that people aren't exercising that muscle as much. And I think it's part of what makes, I mean, I think it's essential for people to be able to avoid being manipulated and be able to safely swim in those gray areas, is being able to think and actually analyze their ethics. And I think for businesses that want to stand out from the market and actually have a real differentiation in their brand, showing people that they're actually thinking about these things and can have a more nuanced stance and defend it and advocate for that, I think is a powerful positioning for a business these days, because when so much is kind of the lowest common denominator or like a low hanging fruit stuff, and everyone's going after that same stuff, if you're able to actually like rise above that, and that's again if nothing else a big contrasting agent in your own marketing and messaging that is going to attract a lot of the people that you're really looking to reach, because it won't just be the same noise as everyone else.
Oh, but it goes back to, the ethical AI use, for example. We could say that we can rally against everyone building the AIs, but they at this point have so much power, wealth, and influence. Can we actually get them to rebuild their AI so it's much more ethical? At this point, I would argue no. Like it's gone too far. We can't get them to rebuild the LLM. The data structure in and of itself has already been used and abused to the point that we can no longer tell them to correct it. They've profited from it. The way I like to preach AI ethics is more about the way the consumer uses it. We set the standard because of how we opt to consume. So if we start choosing to consume it in a healthy way, policy would start flowing so that the right way would be the consistency. So instead of, fighting that the government isn't making policy because they're getting paid off not to make policy against it, at some point they're going to be like, well, we might as well make the policy because everyone's doing it that way anyway.
Yeah. I think it also will, when you get people to, I also think that what you just said is also supported by the MIT study talking about how companies aren't really seeing any value from the AI implementation yet, that the current way of doing things isn't helping the people who are supposedly using it. So the way they're using it isn't working. So there needs to be a better way of using the tool to actually see some value from it. And if the way they've been using it before isn't the ethical way, then it sounds like they need to start using the ethical way, because then they're actually see some value from it, because it's going to be like actually used for the right reasons or for the ethical reasons, that sort of thing. And again, like it's not going to be necessarily the same way for each person, but it's not, the current way isn't working for so many people. So yeah, I agree that trying to get the fundamentals of how these things work changed at this point is not worth it. But the way individuals interact with it and the way the consumers buy it, use it, and stuff. And I think there's the bubble there's gonna be some correction any day now. It's the same sort of pattern we've seen with NFTs and Web3 and crypto and stuff. But
the .com crash.
Yeah. So I think that would probably be a catalyst for people like reevaluating how they use this stuff, because obviously that'll be a big wake up call for people that the current way isn't working. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's finding, again, what are the ethics of your business, and who are you trying to have in your community, and how do you get them, how can you ethically use AI to enhance the human connections with those audience? Because that'll be what helps your business grow in a sane and scalable and sustainable way.
I mean, yeah, there's so many different ways we can approach ethical AI usage, mainly because an ethical AI build doesn't exist currently, is my argument. Claude, for example, tried to claim it's the most ethical, and yet look at the lawsuits that went out against it. You know, there's been evidence of certain, like by some reporters who've investigated it, that the filters have been installed on many of the AIs at this point, especially when it comes to American politics, I guess would be a great way to word it, and the mental health of a particular individual in the American system right now. But if you try to look that up, none of the AIs will actually give a consistent answer. If you try to Google search it, Gemini won't even give a summary on that subject matter. The AI is being told not to let people learn more about the situation so they can form an opinion on the situation. So when we have the AIs being forced to filter in that way, is it even an unfeathered algorithm that allows the predictive market to actually come out? So at that point, if we tried the GEO process of marketing, which is the new thing, which is get the name out there enough that it becomes the predictive word for the algorithm, then it could just be filtered anyway. So why not just pay off the filters and force your company name in instead?
Yeah.
So it goes from SEO to just forcing your company into the zeitgeist.
Yeah. Huge mess, and there's definitely more than the scope of one podcast to solve it all.
I keep forgetting that.
Today, Ken, if you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection podcast, please like it, leave a review, and share it. If you'd like to connect myself or Ken, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.